Hi there. I am so happy you found your way to Starlet Sinister tonight. I know you are here to escape the noise, so here is my promise. Only few short ads in the first 10 minutes, but after that, silence. The rest of the video is completely ad-free so you can sleep undisturbed. I've dug deep to bring you fresh stories that you won't find anywhere else. I wanted to bring you something real. If that sounds good to you, a sub would help me a lot. Before you close your eyes, let me know one thing in the comments. What is the weather like outside your window right now? I love imagining where you all are listening from. Now, get comfortable. Let the dark in. Here is story number 1. The ferry terminal looks smaller in winter. Without tourists, it feels like a forgotten room at the back of a house. Snow piles against the doors, and the sea makes a slow, tired sound below the docks. I park my car and turn off the engine, listening to the ticking fade away. This job never feels like real work. A journalist covering quiet towns isn't exciting. Still, my editor says people like slow stories before bed, stories where nothing explodes. My name is Owen, and I write about places nobody notices. Closed libraries, empty schools, old terminals like this one. It suits me because crowds make my chest tight. Even a busy cafe feels too loud. A notebook waits in my coat pocket. The edges are bent from nervous fingers. Biting my pen cap is another habit I can't stop. Ink tastes bitter, but it keeps me calm. Snow crunches under my boots as I walk toward the building. A sign above the door reads, North Shore Ferry, but one letter hangs loose. It taps softly in the wind. The place closed 3 years ago. Funding ran out, and people started driving instead. The island across the water has maybe 40 people left. No reason for daily trips anymore. Inside, the air smells like cold metal and salt. Old ticket windows line the wall. Dust covers the counter where hands once passed coins. My editor asked for a human angle, someone who stayed behind, someone who remembers. A kettle sits on a desk near the corner. Steam curls up slowly. That stops me. Someone is here. Hello, the word comes out soft. Footsteps answer, slow, careful. A woman appears from the back room, gray hair, thick sweater. Her eyes look kind but tired. You must be the writer, she says. I'm Ruth. Relief moves through my shoulders. Owen, thanks for meeting me. Ruth smiles and pours tea into 2 chipped mugs. Not many visitors these days. We sit at the old counter. Outside, snow taps the windows like small fingers. She tells me about the terminal. How kids used to race down the ramp. How fishermen drank coffee here at dawn. Her voice drifts, and I write small notes. A memory sneaks in. Years ago, I missed my sister's wedding for a deadline. She didn't speak to me for months. Work always came first back then. That regret still sits heavy. Ruth stares out the window. Strange night, she says. What's strange? I ask. A bike showed up earlier, she replies. Small one, blue. That makes me pause. Kids come here. No, she says. Not anymore. The kettle clicks off by itself. Steam fades. Silence grows. Where is the bike now? I ask. Outside, she answers. By the ramp. Curiosity pulls me up. Cold air hits my face when the door opens. Snowflakes melt on my eyelashes. The bike leans against a railing, blue paint chipped. A star sticker on the handle, no snow on the seat. Someone arrived after the storm started. A strange thought slips in. People don't come here by accident. Do you mind if I look around? I ask. Ruth shrugs. Just don't fall in. The ramp creaks as I walk down. Ice lines the edges. Waves roll slow and gray. Footprints lead away from the bike. Small ones. Heading toward the storage shed near the water. A shiver moves through me, not cold. Something else. The shed door stands open. Inside smells of rope and old wood. Nets hang from hooks. Hello? My voice echoes. No answer. A sound reaches my ears. Soft. Click. Near a crate, a red toy boat rocks on the floor. No batteries. No wind. I kneel. Touch it. Cold plastic. That brings another memory. My dad built model boats when I was little. After he left, they gathered dust on a shelf. I never threw them away. Someone left you, I whisper. Footprints continue toward a narrow door in the back. I didn't know this shed had another room. The handle feels warm. That makes me freeze. Snow covers everything outside, but this knob holds heat. Breathing slows. Anyone there? Silence answers. The door opens a crack. A face appears. A boy, maybe 10. Brown hair. No cold, I say without thinking. He nods once. Name's Owen. I add. What's yours? Caleb. He whispers. His eyes look tired. Older than a kid should. Why are you here, Caleb? He shrugs. It's quiet. That hits close. Quiet places always pull me too. Your bike's outside, I tell him. He nods again. I know. A snow drifts through the doorway. You can sit inside. I offer. Warmer. After a moment, he steps out. His shoes are thin. Wet. Ruth watches us from the doorway. Her brows pull together. He with you? She asks. No, I answer. But he's cold. She sighs and waves him in. Inside, Caleb sits on a chair too big for him. Hands folded. Ruth pours another mug of tea. He doesn't touch it. You live on the island? She asks. Caleb shakes his head. Town. She tries. Again, no. My pen hovers. This feels less like an interview now. A quiet unease spreads. Where are his parents? Ruth glances at me. Maybe we should call someone. Caleb's eyes widen. Please don't. His voice cracks. That small sound feels loud in the still room. At the time, it felt normal to listen. I tell myself, kids scare easy. I don't want to push. We'll just warm up, I say. Then figure things out. Snow thickens outside. Wind pushes at the walls. Caleb stares at the ticket window. People used to wait there. Yeah, Ruth says softly. Long lines. He nods. Time feels slow. The clock above the door shows 20:10. The second hand doesn't move. That clock's broken, Ruth explains. Has been forever. Caleb keeps staring. Time gets stuck in places. A strange thought forms. This terminal feels like that. Stuck. Ruth excuses herself to the restroom. The kettle clicks on again by itself. I sit across from Caleb. You hungry?
He shrugs. Not really. Silence stretches.
You like boats? I ask. He looks at the floor. Someone did. Ooh. He doesn't answer. Another memory sneaks in. My sister used to love boats too. I skipped her kid's first birthday to chase a story. That regret never leaves. Caleb reaches into his pocket, pulls out a small key. Silver. Found this, he says. I recognize it from the shed door. That opens the back room, I say. Where'd you get it? Floor, he whispers. By a chair. Cold crawls up my arms. Someone's there, he adds. Where? In the office. A slow breath leaves me. Did you talk to them? No, Ruth returns. Everything okay? I nod. He thinks someone's in the office. Her face tightens. No one's been back there in years. Curiosity pulls harder than fear. Let's check. Ruth hesitates, then nods. The office door sticks when we push. Dust floats in the beam of my phone light. Old papers line the desk. A chair faces the wall. Nothing else, but on the chair sits a coat, brown, worn. Buttons loose. Ruth gasps. That belonged to Mark. Ooh, I ask. Caretaker before me, she says. Deed last winter. My heart beats faster. Caleb stares at the coat. He was cold. You knew him? I ask. He sat here, Caleb says, waited. Ruth steps back. This isn't funny. I'm not joking, Caleb replies. The air feels thick, hard to breathe. Another memory hits. My dad waiting in our old living room after Mom left. Silent cold. That picture still hurts. We should leave, Ruth says. But Caleb shakes his head. Not yet.
Why?
I ask. He looks at me because you listen. That lands heavy. Outside, wind howls low. Ruth walks back to the counter shaken. I stay with Caleb. You shouldn't be alone, I say. He looks sad. People leave. That simple sentence cuts deep. I stayed once. I tell him, for work. Missed something important. What? He asks. My sister, I answer. She needed me. Did you go back? He asks. Later? I say, but it wasn't the same. Caleb nods. It never is. Snow presses harder on the windows. Where do you go at night? I ask. Here, he whispers. It's warm sometimes. The heater hums weakly. Ruth watches us from across the room. Fear hides behind her eyes. My phone buzzes. A text from my editor. Still there. Deadline tomorrow. Work again. Always pulling. Caleb notices. You'll leave too? The words sting. Not yet. Outside, a ferry horn echoes faintly from far away. There hasn't been one in years. That makes me shiver. Did you hear that? I ask. Ruth shakes her head. What horn? Caleb smiles faintly. He remembers. What remembers? I ask. The water, he says. Silence returns. The kettle clicks off again. Steam fades, Ruth whispers. We should lock up soon. Caleb stands. I have to go. Where? I ask. He shrugs. Somewhere quiet. Snowflakes cling to his hair as he heads for the door. Wet? I say. Can I walk you? He pauses. Looks at the ramp. You can't? Why not? He points to the ground. Line? I notice it then. A dark strip across the floor. The old ferry track. You can't cross? I ask. He shakes his head. Ruth watches, confused. What line? I step closer. My boot touches it. Cold shoots through me. Caleb steps back. Time moves when you move. I don't fully understand, but something heavy sits in my chest. You don't have to go, I say. It's warm. He smiles a little. That's why. What do you mean? Warm things end, he whispers. Snow swirls harder. Ruth wraps her arms around herself. This is getting strange. Caleb turns to me. You promised to listen? I am, I say. Then stay, he replies. My phone buzzes again. Deadline. A choice sits between us. Work or this. I think of my sister, of missed calls, of empty seats. Caleb holds out his hand. Ruth watches, breath held. The heater clicks on. Off. The clock still doesn't move. I stand there unsure. Snow presses against the glass. His hand waits. I don't move. Not yet. Snow keeps falling like it doesn't care about choices. Big flakes drift past the window and vanish on the glass. The room stays quiet, like it's waiting to. Caleb's hand is still in the air. Small, pale, steady. Ruth doesn't move. She just watches us, eyes wide. My phone buzzes again in my pocket. I don't check it this time. Work can wait. At least I hope it can. You don't have to, I tell Caleb. The words feel weak as soon as I say them. He tilts his head. You said you would listen. His voice is soft, but it feels heavy. I think about my sister, about all the times I said later. Later never came. My hand moves before my mind decides. I take his. Cold rushes up my arm. Not pain, just a deep chill. Ruth gasps. Owen. Her voice sounds far away. The lights flicker once, not off, just a blink. Caleb smiles, not happy, more like relieved. You crossed? He whispers. Time moves now. The clock above the door clicks. The second hand jerks forward. One tick. My chest feels tight, like I just ran a long way. Outside, the water shifts. The sea sounds closer now. Ruth steps toward me. Let go, she says. Please. I look at her. Her face feels blurry like a memory. I'm still here? I say, but I'm not sure if that's true. Caleb tugs my hand gently. Just walk with me, he says. We step outside together. Snow crunches under our feet. The bike is gone. The railing is empty. The ramp looks longer than before, like it stretches into the dark. Where are we going? I ask. My voice shakes. Nowhere, he says. Just moving. The wind picks up. It smells like salt and old metal. I glance back at the terminal. Ruth stands in the doorway. She looks small now, like someone far away. Owen, she calls. The sound feels thin. Caleb squeezes my hand. Don't look back, he whispers. I think about warm rooms, about tea, about voices. My feet slow. I don't stop, but I want to. Do you get cold? I ask him. My breath turns white all the time, he says. People forget. That hurts more than it should. I don't know why. We reach the end of the ramp. The water waits below, dark and still. There's no boat, I say. My heart pounds. Caleb looks at the sea. It remembers, he whispers. A soft horn sounds far away. Low, sad. I feel tired, like I haven't slept in years. My phone buzzes again. I finally look. It's my sister. One missed call. My chest tightens. I stop walking. Caleb turns to me. "You're thinking too loud," he says. "I have to go back." I whisper, "Just for a minute." He doesn't get angry. He just looks tired. "You always say that," he says. "Minutes turn into years." I swallow hard. "I don't want to leave again." "Then don't," he replies. Simple, honest. The water shifts. The wind gets colder. Ruth's voice echoes faintly. "Owen, please." I look at Caleb, then at the dark sea. My hand still holds his. Neither of us moves. Snow keeps falling. The horn fades. I stand there caught between, not stepping forward, not stepping back. Story number 2. The pumps have a sound that never really stops. Even when I try to ignore it, it stays there, low and steady, like something breathing under the floor. That night, I noticed the rhythm before anything else. It felt slower than usual, or maybe I was the one slowing down. I remember thinking the sound felt heavier, like it was pressing up instead of just humming along. I work nights at the irrigation station by the river. It's quiet work, the kind people forget needs doing. I sit in a metal shed on a floating platform and watch numbers that rarely change. If they do, it usually means trouble somewhere far away in the fields. The shed is small enough that I can touch both walls if I stretch my arms. One desk, one chair, one light hanging from a wire in the ceiling. When that light is on, it feels like the world has edges. Everything outside it feels distant and unsure. Beyond the window is the river. At night, the glass turns dark and gives my face back to me instead. I don't like that much, so I keep my eyes low. The river still makes itself known through smell and sound. Wet soil, old leaves, water brushing against metal. I don't mind being alone. At least that's what I say. The truth is softer than that. Being alone is something I learned how to do. After a while, silence stops feeling empty and starts feeling full, like it's holding things you don't want to hear yet. My hand was tapping again before I noticed it. Ring against desk. Soft. Steady. I've done that for years. It started as nothing, just a way to stay awake. My wife noticed it before I did. She said it made her nervous, like I was waiting for something bad. She left before I learned how to stop. For a long time, I didn't wear the ring. I kept it in a drawer at home with old receipts and keys I didn't remember using. One night I put it back on without thinking. It doesn't mean what it once did, but it reminds me I had a life that felt louder than this. The clock on the wall read a little past 3. That hour always feels different. Like the night has gone on too long and the morning is still far away. The air was cool and damp, clinging to my clothes even inside the shed. I stood and checked the gauges, even though I had checked them 10 minutes earlier. Pressure steady. Flow normal. I wrote the numbers down anyway. Writing things down makes them feel real. When I sat again, I noticed the tapping had stopped. My hand hovered over the desk, unsure what to do without the sound. I pressed my fingers flat, feeling the cold metal under my skin. The river shifted outside. Not loud, just a soft movement. I caught myself listening too hard, the way you do when you're alone too long. I grew up near this river. Everyone did. It was part of the town in a way the school or shops never were. People talked about it like it could hear you. Respect it. Don't play near it at night. Don't trust calm water. Those words followed me into adulthood, even when I pretended they didn't. My cousin Jamie used to laugh at those warnings. He was older than me, louder than me, and never seemed afraid. I followed him everywhere when we were kids. If Jamie said something was fine, I believed him without question. That trust sits heavy in me now. The memory came back slowly, like it didn't want to be pushed. A winter night. Breath fogging in the air. The smell of dry grass and cold water. Jamie talking about fishing like it was nothing special. We didn't tell our parents how far we were going. We said we'd stay near the ramp. That lie still feels warm and sick in my stomach when I think about it. I tell myself we were kids. I tell myself we didn't know better. Neither of those thoughts helped much. At the station, I shifted in my chair and listened to the pumps. The sound was steady. It should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like something counting time for me. I stood again and checked the door. Locked. I checked it twice anyway. The metal was cold and a little wet from the air. I rested my forehead against it for a second and closed my eyes. That's when I felt it. Not a sound. A feeling. A soft shake under my boots, so small I almost blamed my own balance. I held still, listening. Nothing followed right away. At the time, it felt normal to tell myself it was nothing. Pumps vibrate. Platforms move. Water shifts weight. Then it happened again. The desk trembled just enough for my pen to roll a short distance and stop. I watched it until it went still. The pumps hadn't changed. The gauges were steady. My ring tapped once against the desk before I caught it. The river outside was too quiet. No insects, no birds. Nights like that always made me uneasy when I was younger. Too still, like the world was waiting. Another slow thud moved through the floor. Heavier this time. Careful, like something placing weight where it meant to. I pushed my chair back and stood too fast. The scrape sounded loud inside the shed, sharp against the hum. I waited for something to answer it. Nothing did. The walkway connects the platform to the shore. Long, narrow, lit by yellow lights that stretch shadows over the water. I leaned toward the window and looked empty. Still, the feeling didn't leave. The vibration came again, closer now, or maybe clearer. It was hard to tell. Sound and feeling mixed strangely over water. I backed away from the window and rested my hand on the desk. I thought about the campsite again. The way the fire didn't reach far enough. The way the trees stood too still. I remembered staying back while Jamie moved closer to the river. I told myself I was being careful. I still tell myself that. Dust drifted from the ceiling as another soft thud passed through the shed. It fell slowly in the light, calm and quiet, like it didn't know it should worry me. I reached for the phone. The line runs straight to the main office. I picked it up and listened. Nothing but a low hiss, like wind moving through grass. I set it down gently. The smell changed then, just a little. Dry earth mixed with river damp. It reminded me of the bank after the water drops back and the mud cracks open. My throat tightened. I swallowed and tasted nothing. Jamie's face came to mind. Older now, quieter. We don't talk much. When we do, we stick to safe things. Weather, work, sports scores. We never talk about the river. Another sound came from above. Slow. Heavy. The roof groaned softly, metal stretching under weight. The hanging light swayed, just enough to make the shadows slide along the walls. I didn't move. I wasn't sure I could. Each second dragged. My legs ached from standing still. I tried to focus on the pumps, on the steady hum that meant things were still working. A faint scrape followed, not loud, just slow, like something dragging across metal without hurry. I closed my eyes and breathed through my nose. The smell of the shed, the river, the metal, all mixed together. When I opened them again, a thin white line had appeared in the corner of the window. A crack, small, quiet, patient. The light flickered once, then steadied. My hand pressed flat against the desk. The ring felt cold, heavier than before. I thought about the deep water I never stepped into, about how staying back didn't stop the fear from following me anyway. The scraping stopped. Silence pressed in from every side, thick and waiting. I stayed where I was, listening for the next sound, knowing it would decide what I did next. I stayed still longer than felt safe. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It felt crowded, like the air itself was holding something back. My ears strained, waiting for a sound that didn't come. The pumps were still running, but they felt far away now. Their steady hum sounded thin, like it was coming from another place. I focused on it anyway. Counting the beats helped keep my thoughts from drifting too far. I shifted my weight, slow and careful. The floor didn't move this time. No shake. No answer. That almost made it worse. I had learned long ago that silence after a warning can mean more than the warning itself. My eyes kept going back to the window. The crack hadn't grown, but it hadn't faded either. It sat there, a pale line against the dark, like something half-finished. I wondered how much pressure it took to do that. I didn't want to test the answer. I thought about the walkway again, about the narrow railings and the dark water below, about how the lights cast shadows that made it hard to see where the edge really was. My chest tightened just thinking about it. The memory of the river bend came back stronger this time. The way the water looked calm until you stepped closer. The way depth hides itself. I had always stayed back, always let Jamie take the first step. That habit never left me. A soft sound brushed the roof again. Not a thud this time. More like a slow shift, metal easing under weight. I imagined something adjusting its stance, settling in like it had all the time it needed. I pressed my palm harder against the desk. The metal was cold, grounding. My ring touched the surface and stayed still. I didn't let it tap. Another smell crept in through the vents, dry and sharp mixed with damp air. It reminded me of dust after a long drought, when the ground cracks open and waits. I swallowed and tried to breathe through my nose. I reached for the logbook without thinking. The pages were stiff and cool. I flipped it open and stared at the last line I'd written. Normal readings. Normal night. The words felt wrong now, like they belonged to someone else. The light above me swayed again, just a little. Its shadow stretched along the wall, then pulled back. I watched it move, slow and steady, like a clock hand marking time I didn't want to measure. I thought about calling out. Just my voice soft, testing the space. The idea stayed in my throat and went no further. I didn't trust what might answer. The silence deepened. Even the river seemed to pause, its soft laps against the platform slowing until I had to listen hard to hear them. My ears rang with the effort. A faint scrape sounded near the edge of the roof. It moved, inch by inch, toward the side facing the water. I pictured something leaning over, peering down. The image made my stomach turn. I took one small step back, then another. My heel bumped the chair leg, and I froze, waiting for a reaction. Nothing followed, no sound, no shift. My thoughts drifted to Jamie again, to how quiet he got after that winter. How he stopped laughing so loud. We never talked about why. We didn't need to. Some things settle into you without words. I wondered if he ever felt this same stillness. If he ever woke up at night, thinking he heard something heavy moving where it shouldn't. The thought made me feel less alone and more afraid. The phone sat on the desk where I'd left it. I picked it up again, slow. This time, I held it to my ear longer. The hiss was still there, steady and low. Under it, for just a moment, I thought I heard something else. A faint rhythm, almost like breath. I pulled the phone away and set it down. My hand shook, so I pressed it flat until it stopped. The pumps hummed on, unaware. The roof creaked again, closer to the edge now. The sound traveled down the wall, a soft complaint from old metal. Dust drifted loose and settled on my sleeve. I brushed it off without looking. I edged toward the door, careful not to rush. Each step felt loud in my head, even though I placed my boots slow and flat. I stopped with my hand hovering inches from the handle. If I opened it, I'd be outside. No walls, no ceiling, just the open walkway and the dark river. The thought made my breath come shallow. I waited there, listening. The silence pressed in so close it felt like weight on my shoulders. I thought about turning back, about staying where I was and letting the night pass me by. That thought didn't feel true. Another small sound came from above. A scrape, shorter this time, then nothing. The roof seemed to relax just a little. The light steadied. I didn't know if that meant it was leaving or simply settling into stillness. The not knowing sat heavy in my chest. My fingers curled around the door handle. The metal was colder than I expected. I didn't turn it yet. I just held it there, feeling the chill sink into my skin. The river made a sound then, a deeper lap against the platform, like a slow breath taken too close. I glanced toward the window again. The crack was still there, unchanged, waiting. I thought about the fields this water fed, about how much depended on these pumps running through the night. about how many people slept without ever thinking about the river moving under them. Another memory surfaced, soft and unwelcome. Jamie standing at the edge of the water, looking back at me like he expected me to follow. I never did. That moment stretched long in my mind. I loosened my grip on the handle, then tightened it again. My heart thudded slow and heavy, each beat loud in my ears. I wondered if whatever was above me could hear it. The smell shifted again, faint but clear. Dry earth, closer now. Like something had leaned down near the vents. I held my breath without meaning to. Seconds passed, maybe minutes. Time felt loose, like it didn't know where to settle. The pumps kept humming, steady and blind. I thought about stepping outside, about taking one look down the walkway just to be sure. The idea felt wrong and right at the same time. A choice waiting to be made. The silence stayed with me, thick and patient. Nothing moved. Nothing spoke. Whatever was there didn't seem to hurry. I stood there with my hand on the door, listening to the river and the pumps in my own breath, knowing that the next thing I did would change the rest of the night. I hadn't decided yet. Story number 3. I didn't think much of it when the phone rang that late. It was just past midnight, and I was still awake, sitting on the edge of my bed with the lamp turned low. Nights stretched out for me like that. Sleep came slowly, if it came at all. I usually blamed the coffee, even though I knew that wasn't the real reason. I live alone in a small apartment above a closed bakery. During the day, it smells faintly like old bread and dust. At night, it smells like nothing at all. The quiet up there can feel thick, especially when the city outside finally settles. That night, the quiet felt heavier than usual. I work as a freelance fact checker. It sounds more important than it is. People send me strange claims, blurry screenshots, half-finished stories they don't want their name attached to. I check sources, dates, and details, then send back a short answer. Most of the time, the answer is boring, false, out of context. Old news dressed up as something new. I like the job because it keeps things distant. I don't have to be involved. I don't have to care too much. That's what I tell myself anyway. The phone kept ringing, slow and patient. I watched it light up the nightstand and felt a small wave of irritation. I almost let it go to voicemail. At the time, it felt normal to answer. The voice on the other end was calm, steady, and quiet. A man, maybe older. He spoke like someone used to being listened to. He asked if I still looked into unusual submissions. I hesitated before answering. I told him yes, even though I'd stopped taking those months ago after one case left me feeling unsettled for days. He didn't give his name. He didn't apologize for calling late. He said he had something that didn't belong anywhere public. Something that needed a careful look. I asked where he got it. There was a pause long enough for me to think the call had dropped. That part doesn't matter, he said. I should have ended the call there. I know that now. But I have a habit of seeing things through, even when my gut tells me to stop. It's gotten me into trouble before. Not dangerous trouble, just the kind that stays with you. I told him to send it. A few minutes later, an email arrived. No subject line, no name, just a single attachment. I stared at it for a moment, my finger hovering over the trackpad. I had another bad habit then, one I don't talk about much. When something makes me uneasy, I pause longer than I should, like hesitation might protect me. I opened the file. The image filled my screen. It was a hallway. Plain walls, flat carpet, ceiling lights spaced evenly in a straight line. The kind of place you might walk through every day and never remember afterward. Still, something about it made my stomach tighten. The longer I looked, the more wrong it felt. The lights didn't cast shadows the way they should have. The space looked stretched, pulled too far in one direction. Like a photo taken with a lens that didn't quite fit. I leaned back and rubbed my eyes. It was late. I was tired. I told myself that was enough of an explanation. Then I noticed something near the bottom edge of the image. Almost cut off. A piece of paper taped to the wall. On it, written thick black marker, were 3 words. Still watching. Walk. I closed the image without thinking. For a while, I just sat there, listening to the hum of my refrigerator through the wall. I have always been afraid of deep silence. Not darkness. Not being alone. Just silence that lasts too long. It makes my thoughts too loud. I replied to the email with a short message. Asked where the image came from. Asked what it was supposed to prove. The reply came back almost right away. Not proof, it said. Practice. I didn't answer after that. I shut down my laptop and moved to the couch, leaving the lamp on. I told myself I'd deal with it in the morning. I even laughed quietly at how uneasy I felt. Pictures don't do anything, they stay where you leave them. Sleep took longer than usual, but it came. The first thing I noticed when I woke was the smell. Not bad, just unfamiliar. Like old carpet after rain. I opened my eyes, expecting to see my living room ceiling. Instead, I was staring at a blank, off-white surface inches from my face. I sat up too fast and felt dizzy. My head brushed against something soft. Carpet. On the wall. I pushed myself back, my heart starting to race, and looked around. The room was empty. No furniture. No windows. Just a square space with pale walls and dim lights buzzing overhead. The carpet ran up the walls and across the ceiling, like the whole place had been wrapped without care. The sound of the lights was low but steady, like something breathing. I stood slowly. My legs felt weak, like I'd been lying down for days. Out of habit, I checked my pockets. Shoes still on. Phone still there. That small detail grounded me more than it should have. There was one door. I walked toward it, slow and careful. The carpet swallowed the sound of my steps. When I opened the door, it led to another hallway. Same walls, same carpet, same lights, same hum. I didn't panic right away. Panic comes later. First comes confusion, then a strange focus. I picked a direction and started walking. After a few minutes, I checked my phone. No signal. No time. The screen stayed black no matter how many times I pressed the button. I slid it back into my pocket and kept moving. The hallway went on longer than it should have. Doors lined the walls at even spaces. Most were closed. One stood open, showing a room just like the one I woke in. I didn't go inside. As I walked, I noticed small things. A faint stain on the carpet that looked scrubbed too hard. A light that flickered longer than the others. The hum rising and falling without ever stopping. I started counting my steps. I've done that since I was a kid whenever I felt trapped. It's a bad habit. It never helps, but I do it anyway. 23, 24, 25. I thought about my job, about all the times I told people not to trust what they found online. About how often I warned others about things that felt personal, but weren't meant for them. That thought followed me longer than the halls did. Somewhere far away, I heard another sound. Not loud, just out of reach. Like fabric brushing against fabric. I stopped walking. The sound stopped too. I waited, holding my breath without meaning to. The lights buzzed on, uncaring. After a moment, it felt safer to move than to stay still. So I walked again, slower now. I passed a door with something pressed into the carpet beside it. One word, shaped with something blunt. Keep. I didn't try to guess what it meant. The lights grew dimmer farther down. One was completely out, leaving a dark patch that seemed deeper than it should have been. I avoided stepping into it, even though I didn't know why. That was when I saw the chair. It sat in the middle of the hallway, plain and wooden, facing away from me. It hadn't been there before. I was sure of that. My chest tightened as I stood there, staring at it. I didn't approach right away. I waited, half expecting it to move. It didn't. When I finally stepped closer, the carpet felt softer, almost warm. I reached out and touched the back of the chair. Cold, solid. A folded piece of paper was taped to the seat. My name was written on it in neat, careful letters. Seeing it there made my hands shake. "You always look," the note said. "You never stay." I dropped it like it burned. Behind me, the sound returned. Closer now. Heavier. I didn't turn around. I stepped past the chair and kept walking, my heart beating slow and loud in my ears. The hallway narrowed ahead, the walls pressing in. The smell grew stronger, damp and old. I slowed near the corner, unsure what I wanted to find. Before I turned, I felt it. Not a touch, just a presence close enough to change the air. I stood there with one hand against the wall, listening to the lights and my own breath, trying to decide whether to turn the corner or finally look back. I stayed where I was, my hand still pressed to the wall. The carpet felt warmer there. Like it, held heat longer than the air. The lights above me hummed in a slow, uneven way, rising and falling as if they were thinking about stopping. I told myself not to rush. Rushing had never helped me before. Every mistake I could remember came from moving too fast, from wanting answers right away. I breathed in through my nose and counted without numbers, just letting the seconds pass. The presence behind me didn't move. It didn't touch me. It just stayed close enough to change the way the space felt. That was worse than anything loud. I thought about the apartment again. The lamp by my bed, the quiet hum of the fridge, the smell of old bread from the bakery downstairs. Those things felt thin now, like memories from a dream that fades once you try to hold onto it. My phone felt heavy in my pocket. I took it out slowly and pressed the button again. Nothing. The screen stayed dark and smooth, reflecting the lights above me in a dull blur. I slid it back without checking further. I took one step forward. Nothing happened. Another step followed, then another. The presence didn't rush me. It didn't chase. It matched my pace without sound, like it knew where I was going before I did. The hallway opened into a wider space. Not a room, exactly. More like a place where several halls met and forgot where they were supposed to lead. The lights here were spaced farther apart, leaving long stretches of dimness between them. I stopped in the middle of it and listened. Somewhere far away, I could hear a soft shift, fabric against fabric. Slow and careful, it reminded me of someone adjusting their seat in a quiet room. That thought brought something back with it. A memory I hadn't visited in years. Sitting in the back of a lecture hall during college, pretending to take notes while watching people instead. I always felt safer observing than joining in. I still do. I moved again, choosing a hallway without thinking too hard about it. Every option felt the same. The carpet stayed soft under my feet, dulling each step until it felt like I wasn't moving at all. I noticed marks on the wall as I walked. Not words this time. Just shallow lines pressed into the surface, like someone had dragged their fingers there over and over. They were low, near where a hand might rest if someone needed support. I rested my palm there for a moment. The wall gave slightly under my touch, then settled back. The hum dipped lower. For a second, it almost stopped. My ears rang in the near silence, and my chest tightened. I've never handled quiet well. Silence feels like waiting for something you can't see. The hum returned, and I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. The hallway bent gently to the left. As I followed it, I noticed the lights were changing. Not brighter or darker, just older, somehow. Their buzz sounded tired, stretched thin from being on too long. A door stood open ahead. I slowed, every part of me wanting to turn away. Still, my feet carried me forward. I stayed just outside the doorway and looked in. The room was larger than the others, empty except for a long bench running along one wall. Above it, someone had pressed words into the carpeted surface. "Why you can't say tea?" I didn't sit. I stood there, watching the room breathe in small ways I couldn't quite explain. The presence behind me shifted, closer now, not touching, just waiting. I thought about all the times I'd walked away from things that asked me to stay. Jobs, conversations, people. It always felt easier to leave than to risk being seen too closely. I stepped back from the room and continued down the hall. The space narrowed again, and the lights grew steadier. The hum settled into something close to a rhythm. It almost sounded like a heartbeat, if I let myself think that way. I started counting my steps again without meaning to. It helped give shape to the walk, even if the numbers didn't matter. At the end of the hall, there was another turn. Before I reached it, I noticed something on the floor. A notebook. It lay open, pages pressed flat by their own weight. I crouched beside it slowly, keeping my movements calm. The pages were blank at first glance, but when I leaned closer, I saw faint impressions. Writing that had been pressed hard enough to leave marks without ink. I traced one line with my finger and felt the grooves under my skin. They were notes, short fragments. Things like, "Too quiet today," and "Lights stayed on and walked past the same door again." They could have been mine. That idea settled into me deeper than I wanted. I closed the notebook and left it where it was. The presence behind me eased back, giving me space. I didn't know if that meant approval or patience. I reached the corner and stopped before turning. My hand hovered in the air, unsure where to rest. The wall, my pocket. Nothing felt right. I listened again. The hum was steady now. The fabric sounded faded. Whatever shared the space with me wasn't moving anymore. I thought about turning around, about finally looking back and seeing what had followed me all this way. The idea felt heavy, like lifting something you already know is too much. I didn't turn. Instead, I stepped around the corner. The hallway beyond looked no different from the others. Same walls, same carpet, same lights. Still, something about it felt finished, like a sentence waiting for a period. I stood there, letting that feeling settle. My chest rose and fell slow and even. I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding. I was just there. The presence behind me stayed where it was. Close enough to feel, far enough to choose. I realized then that this place didn't need me to be afraid. It just needed me to keep moving, to keep noticing, to keep staying longer than I wanted to. I took another step forward and felt the floor give slightly, then hold. I didn't know where the hallway would lead. I didn't know if it led anywhere at all. What I knew was that stopping hadn't helped me before, and neither had running. So I walked, slow and steady, listening to the hum and my own breath, letting the space decide how much of itself it wanted to show me. Story number 4. I didn't think much of it the first year I noticed it. I was young enough that most things in the house felt bigger than they should have. The living room smelled like pine and dust, and the heater made a soft ticking sound that came and went. Snow pressed against the windows in slow waves, and my mother moved through the room like she was counting her steps. I remember sitting on the floor, with my back against the couch, tracing patterns in the carpet with my finger. The fireplace was dark, just a black square in the wall, and above it hung the stockings. There were 4 that matched. Thick fabric, white trim, names stitched in careful letters. Then there was one more hanging a little apart from the rest. That one was plain, red, thin. It didn't have a name. I stared at it longer than the others. Even then, something about it felt different. It didn't sag the same way. It didn't move when the heat clicked on. It just stayed still. When I asked my mother who it was for, she smiled without showing her teeth. She said it was part of how things had always been done. Her voice stayed light, but her hands kept busy, folding and unfolding the same dish towel. I didn't ask again that year. Winters were long where we lived. Snow came early and stayed late, turning the world quiet and small. Our house sat at the edge of town, close enough to hear the wind move through the trees, but far enough that nights felt empty. I was afraid of crowds even then, so I didn't mind the isolation. I liked knowing where everyone was. Every winter, the stockings went up the same way, same order, same spacing. The plain red one always last. If it twisted, my mother fixed it right away. If it slipped, she noticed before anyone else did. It was never full. On Christmas mornings, my sister and I pulled candy and small gifts from ours while my parents watched with tired smiles. The plain red stocking stayed flat, its fabric smooth and untouched. No one joked about it. No one pointed it out. It was like it belonged to the wall instead of the house. I was born near the end of winter, close enough to the holidays that people mixed things together. I didn't like that. I wanted days that belonged only to me. My sister teased me about it sometimes, saying I was an extra celebration by mistake. My mother would tell her to stop, but she never looked at me when she did. As I got older, the stocking bothered me more. Not in a sharp way, more like a pebble in a shoe you forget about until you stop walking. I would catch myself staring at it while pretending not to. By the time I was a teenager, I stopped asking questions. I learned that some topics made the room feel smaller. When the snow piled up outside and the nights stretched on, I could feel it in the way my parents moved around each other. Careful, quiet, like they were trying not to wake something. I left home after school and didn't come back much at first. Life got busy in the way it does when you're trying to prove something. Work, shared apartments, long bus rides. I didn't miss the winters. Still, every year, my mother sent a message asking if I was coming home. Every year I said yes. It felt easier than explaining why I should stay away. This winter, the snow came early again. Roads closed. Trains delayed. By the time I arrived, the sky was already dark, and the house looked smaller than I remembered. Light spilled from the windows, warm and dull. My mother hugged me longer than usual. She smelled like soap and something old I couldn't place. Her hands were cold, even inside the house. She asked about my trip, but her eyes kept drifting toward the living room. Inside, everything looked the same. Same couch, same table, same rug with the worn corner near the fireplace, and above it, the stockings, 4 matching ones, and the plain red one. It hung a little lower this year, just enough to notice if you were looking. Dinner passed quietly. My father talked about the weather. My sister scrolled through her phone and smiled at things she didn't share. My mother kept glancing at the clock. When I asked if something was wrong, she shook her head too fast and said she was just tired. Later, while the others watched television, I stood in the hallway and watched my mother hang the stockings properly. She moved quickly at first, lifting each one and smoothing the fabric. When she reached for the plain red stocking, she paused. Her fingers pressed into it, hard enough to leave marks. She held it there for a moment, breathing through her nose. Then she hung it carefully, adjusting it until it sat just right. When she stepped back, her shoulders stayed tense. That was when I felt it. Not fear. Not yet. Just a sense that the night was waiting for something. Snow kept falling after everyone went to bed. I lay awake listening to it brush against the roof. The house made its usual sounds, but they felt slower, stretched thin. I turned over again and again, unable to get comfortable. Sometime after midnight, I got up for water. The hallway light was off, but the glow from the tree filled the living room with soft color. The stockings hung in shadow. The plain red one didn't look flat anymore. It wasn't full. Not exactly, but the fabric dipped inward, like it was holding its breath. I stood there longer than I meant to. The heater clicked on, and the other stockings shifted slightly. The red one didn't move. I told myself it was the way it hung. That fabric stretches, that I was tired. In the kitchen, my mother was sitting at the table with her hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from. She looked up when I came in, her eyes sharp with worry. I mentioned the stocking, keeping my voice light. Asked if it had always hung like that. Her face changed. Not much, just enough. She told me not to touch it. The way she said it mattered more than the words. Quiet, firm, like a rule that had been broken before. I nodded and went back upstairs, but sleep didn't come after that. I lay there thinking about winters from years ago. About the way my mother never left the house on certain nights. About how she always checked the fireplace before bed, even when it hadn't been used in days. Sometime later, the house went very quiet. Not asleep quiet, waiting quiet. I found myself back in the living room without remembering the walk down. The tree lights blinked slowly. The air felt colder near the fireplace. Up close, the red stocking felt stiff. The fabric was rough under my fingers. I told myself I was just straightening it, just fixing the way it hung. I slipped my hand inside. The cold surprised me. Not sharp. Deep, like stepping into shade after being in the sun too long. My fingers brushed against something small and solid. I pulled my hand back right away, heart thudding in my ears. I stood there, breathing slowly, trying to calm myself. Behind me, the floor creaked. My mother stood in the doorway, wrapped in her robe, her face pale. She didn't yell. She didn't move closer. She just watched me, her eyes fixed on my hands. She told me again to leave it alone. Her voice shook this time. We sat on the couch after that, the space between us wide. She stared at the fireplace while I stared at the floor. Snow tapped at the windows, steady and patient. She started talking without looking at me. About winters long ago. About quiet houses. About choices made when the world feels too empty. She didn't explain everything. She didn't need to. I understood enough to stop asking questions. When she finished, the room felt heavier, like the house had settled deeper into the snow. She told me to go back upstairs, that she would take care of things. I stood there, unsure what to do with my hands. Part of me wanted to argue. Part of me wanted to apologize. I did neither. As I reached the stairs, I heard something shift inside the fireplace. Not loud, just a soft movement, like settling ash. My mother didn't turn around. I went back to my room and lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The house made sounds below me. Slow ones. Careful ones. I couldn't tell if they came from footsteps or from the walls themselves. At some point, the sound stopped. I don't know how long I lay there awake. Time felt loose, like it didn't belong to the night anymore. When I finally closed my eyes, it wasn't sleep that came, just darkness. Something about the house felt different after that. Not broken, not fixed. Just waiting. I stayed still, listening, knowing there was something I hadn't said, and something I wasn't ready to hear yet. I woke before dawn, not because of a sound, but because the quiet felt different. It wasn't heavier or louder. It just didn't sit the same way in the room. I lay still and waited, hoping the feeling would fade on its own. It didn't. The snow outside had stopped sometime in the night. Without it brushing the windows, the house felt wider, like it had stretched while no one was watching. I stayed in bed longer than usual, afraid that moving too soon might draw attention to me. When I finally stood up, the floor was cold under my feet. The hallway smelled faintly of ash and something worn, like fabric that had been folded and unfolded too many times. I paused at the top of the stairs and listened. The house wasn't asleep. There was a slow movement downstairs. Not footsteps. Not quite. More like the sound of someone shifting weight and then stopping, as if they were careful not to be noticed. I told myself it was just my mother waking early, trying to stay busy. I went down quietly. The living room lights were off. The fireplace was dark, filled with gray ash that hadn't been touched. The stockings still hung above it. Four that matched, neat and familiar. And the plain red one at the end. It didn't look the same. I couldn't say how. It wasn't full. It wasn't empty. It just felt unsettled, like fabric that hadn't decided what shape it wanted to be yet. I stood there and waited for my chest to relax. It didn't. My mother sat near the window, wrapped in her robe, her hands folded together. She stared at the floor like she was counting something I couldn't see. When I said her name, she looked up slowly. Her smile didn't last. "Did you sleep?" she asked. I nodded, even though it wasn't true. Lying felt easier than explaining the feeling in my chest. She didn't question it. We sat there in silence. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it should have. I kept expecting the heater to come on, to break the sound, but it stayed quiet. After a while, my mother stood and went to the fireplace. She adjusted the stockings one by one, smoothing the fabric with care. When she reached the red one, she stopped. Her hand stayed there longer than it needed to. "I'll make breakfast," she said, turning away too quickly. I stayed where I was. Waiting had become a habit for me. It felt safer than acting. Up close, the red stocking looked thinner than the others. The fabric had softened over time, worn down by years of being touched and straightened. The hook above it was slightly bent, like it had carried more weight than it should have. I didn't touch it. Breakfast passed quietly. My sister complained about the cold. My father talked about the roads. My mother watched her coffee instead of drinking it. No one mentioned the night. Later, the house settled into its daytime sounds. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed nothing had happened, but the feeling stayed with me, low and steady. That evening, the light faded early. Winter does that. The lamps came on, but the corners of the rooms stayed dim. I found myself watching the clock again, even though I didn't know what I was waiting for. When it was time for bed, my mother said she would stay up a little longer. She didn't explain why. She didn't need to. I lay in bed fully dressed, listening. The house shifted around me. Pipes moved. The wind picked up. Then, slowly, the sounds changed. Downstairs, something moved. Not fast. Not loud. Just enough to make the air feel different. I sat up and waited, counting my breaths instead of my steps. I went to the stairs and looked down. The living room was darker than before. The fireplace was a deeper black, like it had opened instead of emptied. The red stocking came into view last. It moved, just a little, like fabric settling after being held. My mother stood near the mantel. She wasn't looking inside the fireplace. She wasn't looking at the stocking either. She just stood there, still and careful, like she was listening. She saw me on the stairs. "It's okay," she said softly. "You don't need to come closer." I stayed where I was. From that distance, I could tell the stocking wasn't flat. Something rested inside it, stretching the fabric just enough to be noticed. I didn't try to guess what it was. The fireplace made a quiet sound. Not threatening. Not comforting either. Just present. My mother adjusted the stocking and stepped back. For a moment, the room felt lighter. Or maybe I just wanted it to. She turned off the lamp and gestured for me to go back upstairs. I did. Sleep came later, shallow and uneven. I dreamed of snow falling inside the house, covering things gently without making a sound. In the morning, the red stocking hung the way it always had. Plain still. Unwilling to explain itself. My mother looked tired. She also looked alert, like someone who hadn't stopped listening all night. We talked about small things. Safe things. When I left that afternoon, she hugged me longer than usual. Her hand pressed briefly against my back, like she wanted to be sure I was solid. As I drove away, the house disappeared behind the trees. The feeling in my chest stayed with me. Some things don't end, they just wait. Story number 5, I didn't think much of it at first. The sound, Old houses make noises, especially when the air changes. Wood settles. Nails complain. Floors remember weight that isn't there anymore. I kept telling myself that as I worked. The house wasn't mine. Not really. I had come across it by accident after the trailer was gone. I still don't like thinking about that night, so I won't. What matters is that this place was standing, and I was not ready to be outside anymore. The front door felt thin when I touched it. Too polite. Too trusting. I dragged boards in from the hallway and held them in place while I hammered. Each hit echoed through the empty rooms, sharp and lonely. I worked faster than I needed to. Noise felt safer than quiet. When the door was finally covered, I leaned my forehead against the wood and breathed. My hands were shaking. I told myself it was the cold. The house still felt wrong. Bigger than it should have been. Full of other people's pauses. Shoes by the door. A jacket on the back of a chair. A bowl with a spoon left inside it, as if someone had just stepped away. They had left in a hurry. I didn't explore much. I didn't want to know too much about them. Knowing made it harder to stay. I only checked what I had to. Rooms, corners, locks. That was when I found the shed. I won't describe what was inside, not because it was horrible, but because it was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't belong to sleep. I moved carefully like sound itself might notice me. After that, I stopped trying to understand what was happening. Understanding felt useless. All I needed was time. The kitchen sink ran brown before it cleared. I washed my arms and watched the water carry something away that I didn't want to name. My skin felt tight, sensitive, like I had been standing too close to something warm for too long. I didn't eat. I couldn't. At the time, it felt normal to focus on small things, the way the light hit the counter, the slow drip from the faucet, anything that didn't move on its own. The basement felt like the right choice. No windows, thick walls. The stairs down were narrow and the air changed as soon as I stepped onto the concrete. Cooler. Still. I brought a lantern and a blanket. The blanket smelled like dust and something faintly sweet, like old soap. I wrapped it around my shoulders and sat behind a row of shelves stacked with boxes that hadn't been opened in years. Down there, the house sounded far away. The quiet pressed in slowly, not heavy, just steady. I watched the lantern flame wobble and tried to stay awake. Sleep felt dangerous, like it might pull me somewhere I couldn't come back from. I kept thinking I heard something else layered under the silence. A low sound, not loud enough to be real. When I held my breath, it disappeared. I told myself it was my heart. Time passed strangely. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for my eyes to burn, long enough for my thoughts to drift into places I didn't want them to go. Then the sound came back. It wasn't sudden. That was the worst part. It started like light tapping upstairs, the kind you might ignore if you were tired. I tilted my head, listening. The tapping spread. Not faster, just fuller, like something had learned how to fill space. I didn't move. The sound grew thicker, harder to separate from itself. It rolled across the ceiling above me and found the stairs. I could feel it through the concrete, a faint vibration that made my teeth ache. I pulled the blanket tighter and told myself not to think about how the house was built, how old it was, how many small spaces there were inside the walls. That was when I heard it close to me, not the sound, something else. A thin whine passed near my ear, so light it could have been breath. I turned my head too fast and felt dizzy. The lantern light didn't change. Nothing was there. A moment later, it happened again. I felt my chest tighten. Not panic, something colder, more careful. I stayed very still, afraid movement would make it real. The sound came back, closer this time. Circling, testing. I didn't swat. I didn't breathe deeply. I just sat there and listened as the space around me seemed to shrink by inches. When the blanket shifted, I froze. I hadn't moved it. I was sure of that. At the time, it felt small. It wasn't. The noise upstairs changed. The house began to answer back, wood complaining under pressure it wasn't meant to hold. Something pushed against the walls, not hard, just enough to make them speak. The sound filled the rooms above me, a restless presence moving from place to place. I could hear it at the top of the stairs now, gathering. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't only outside. It felt like it was moving through the air itself. The basement door creaked. I didn't look at it. I stared at the lantern and watched the flame bend sideways, even though there was no breeze. The sound rushed down the stairs in waves. Not footsteps, not bodies, just motion, pressure, weight without shape. I curled forward under the blanket and made myself small. Smaller than I had ever been. My thoughts thinned out one by one until there was only listening. The air felt crowded. Something pressed down on the blanket. Not sharply. Slowly, like settling snow. The weight increased in patient layers, and I understood then why the shed had been so quiet. I wanted to scream, but sound felt useless. The pressure grew, pinning me to the floor without pain, without urgency. Just certainty. The lantern went out. In the dark, I felt the house disappear. Not collapse, just fade, like it had served its purpose. My thoughts began to drift, pulled in the same direction as the sound. I wasn't afraid anymore. Fear takes energy. I didn't have that left. I thought about the trailer, about how thin its walls had been, about how sure I had been that doors meant safety. I don't know when I stopped being alone. I only know that the sound no longer felt like something happening to me. It felt like something I was part of, a shared movement, a shared hunger, maybe, or maybe just a shared direction. When the pressure lifted, I didn't stand. I couldn't remember how. The basement felt larger now, endless. The dark stretched in ways that didn't make sense. I wasn't sure where my hands ended. Somewhere far above, the house was very quiet again. I stayed there, listening, feeling the pull of motion beyond the walls, toward somewhere else. Somewhere already waiting. I haven't decided yet if I will move with it. I stayed where I was for a long time. Long enough for the idea of standing to feel unfamiliar. The dark held steady, not pressing, not pulling. It waited. The sound moved away from me in slow layers, not leaving, just shifting. Like a tide that never shows itself, only its effect on the shore. I listened until my breathing found a softer rhythm. When I finally moved, it wasn't a choice. My body adjusted on its own, finding a shape that felt less wrong. The floor was cold, but the cold didn't matter. It felt distant, like weather seen through glass. The lantern didn't come back on. I didn't try to light it. Light suddenly felt unnecessary. The dark had weight now. Texture. It wasn't empty. I pushed myself upright with care. My hands found the shelf behind me, then the wall. Concrete, solid, still here. That helped. The sound had changed again. It wasn't above me anymore. It felt spread out, like it had learned the shape of the house and settled into it. The basement felt larger than before, stretched sideways as if the corners had moved. I took one slow step forward. Nothing happened. That felt worse than if something had. I waited, then took another step. My foot brushed against the edge of the blanket. It didn't feel like mine anymore. Just an object that had done its job and been left behind. The stairs were somewhere to my right. I knew that without looking. Direction felt clearer than it should have been, as if the house was gently suggesting where I could go. I didn't go up. Instead, I stood still and listened to the way the sound moved through the walls. It wasn't a single noise. It was made of many small ones, layered so closely they felt like one. A living quiet. A shared presence. The thought made my stomach tighten. I pressed my back against the concrete and slid down until I was sitting again. My breathing slowed. My thoughts followed. I remembered the shed, not what was inside it. Just the way the air had felt when I opened the door. How it had seemed thicker than it should have been. How I had closed it gently, like I didn't want to wake anything. The same care filled the basement now. I wondered if the house had always been like this, if it had simply waited for someone tired enough to notice. Time passed, but it didn't move forward. It pooled. I couldn't tell how long I sat there, listening. Eventually, the sound above grew softer, spreading thinner, like it was learning restraint. I stood again. This time, the stairs didn't feel dangerous. They felt watched, observed with mild interest. I placed my foot on the first step and waited. No resistance. I climbed slowly, one step at a time, stopping often. The air grew warmer as I rose. Not heat. Presence. A fullness that followed me without touching. At the top of the stairs, I paused with my hand on the door. The wood felt smooth. Too smooth. As if it had been worn down by more than hands. I opened it. The house looked the same. That was the strangest part. No damage. No signs of struggle. The boards I had nailed to the door were still in place, holding firm. The furniture hadn't moved. But the space between things felt different. Sound carried farther. The walls felt farther apart. The air held a faint vibration, like a breath taken and held just out of hearing. I stepped into the kitchen. The sink was dry now, the counter clean, too clean, as if time had passed without asking me. I touched my arm. The skin felt normal, warm, solid. That reassured me more than it should have. I moved through the house slowly, testing each room with my presence. The living room, the hallway, the closed bedroom doors. None of them resisted. Outside, the sky was pale. Early light pressed against the windows but didn't quite get in. I didn't open the boards to check. I didn't need to. I could feel what was out there. Not close. Not far. Just everywhere else. The house made a soft sound as I moved, not footsteps. something like approval or acknowledgement. I sat on the couch and rested my elbows on my knees. My hands were steady now. That worried me. Fear should have lingered longer than this. I tried to think of the trailer again. The thin walls, the way sound used to come through them so easily. How I had believed that knowing where the doors were meant safety. The memory felt distant, faded at the edges. I stood and walked to the front door. The boards were tight, the nails firm. I pressed my palm against the wood and listened. On the other side, something shifted, not closer, not farther, just aware. I pulled my hand back. The sound inside the house changed again. Softer, lower, like a shared understanding had been reached. I realized then that the house wasn't keeping things out. It was keeping something in. The thought settled over me without panic. It felt heavy, but it fit, like a truth that had always been nearby, waiting for the right moment. I went to the window and looked at the boards from the inside. Thin, cracked, never meant to last. I could see daylight through the smallest gaps. I wondered how long they would hold if I wanted them to. That question stayed with me. I returned to the basement once more, not because I had to, but because I wanted to feel the dark again. It welcomed me without ceremony. The sound gathered, then loosened like it was giving me space. I sat on the floor where I had been before. The concrete felt familiar now. Less cold, more patient. The sound moved around me, never touching, never leaving. It didn't ask anything. It didn't demand. It waited. I realized I wasn't alone in the way I had been before. The loneliness that had followed me since the trailer was gone had thinned out. Not filled, just shared. The house above creaked softly, settling, remembering. I don't know how long I stayed there. Long enough for the idea of leaving to feel optional. Long enough for the outside to feel less important than it used to. Eventually, I stood again and looked toward the stairs, toward the door, toward the thin line of daylight that marked the world beyond the boards. I didn't move. Not yet. Story number 6. I didn't understand the silence back then. I only know now that it was the first warning. In the mountains near the Olympic Peninsula, silence doesn't mean calm. It feels more like a pause, the kind you notice only after everything else has stopped. When I was 16, I didn't have a word for it. I just knew that when the snow came early that winter, the air around us felt tight, like it didn't want to be disturbed. My father said it was good luck. He said the storm would keep other hunters away and give us the woods to ourselves. He smiled when he said it, the same smile he used whenever he wanted things to feel simple. But his eyes kept drifting toward the trees, then back to the sky, as if he was waiting for a number to change. The cabin had been in our family longer than I'd been alive. Low cedar walls, darkened by years of damp winters. It always smelled like smoke, old wool, and soil that never fully dried. That first night, the porch steps vanished under snow, so evenly it almost looked careful. We were supposed to stay a week. By morning, the rodent was gone. At first, it felt like a break from everything. Just the two of us, nowhere else to be. We split firewood until our fingers went numb. We heated canned food on the stove. The radio sat on the counter, hissing softly, never finding a clear signal. At night, the wind pressed against the cabin and made the walls murmur in low, tired sounds. My father checked the locks more than he needed to. He said it was habit. I didn't argue. Even then, I had a habit of staying quiet when questions felt heavy. I didn't like the way answers could change a room. On the third night, the woods changed, not all at once, not loudly. The sounds that were always there just faded out. No wind through branches, no settling snow. Even the stove burned lower, like it was trying not to be noticed. That was when something touched the cabin. It wasn't a crash. It wasn't violent. Just a single, dull thud against the wall near the kitchen window. The kind of sound that settles in your chest before your ears catch up. My father stood so fast his chair tipped over. He didn't look at me. He reached for the rifle and held it the way he used to when I was younger. Before he trusted me to stay close, we waited. Nothing else happened. No footsteps. No scraping. The silence returned, thicker now, layered. My father finally told me to stay away from the glass. His voice sounded lower than it had that morning. In daylight, the marks were easier to notice. The snow around the cabin was smooth and untouched. No tracks leading toward us. No signs of movement. But the cedar wall beneath the window looked wrong. Long lines pressed into the wood, starting higher than my head and dragging down. They weren't deep enough to break through. They were even, almost careful. My father stared at them longer than I expected. Then he went back inside and shut the door without a word. The day stretched thin after that. He cleaned the rifle again and again. I tried to keep busy sharpening my knife, even though it didn't need it. My hands shook, and I hated that he noticed. The sun dropped early, turning the snow blue. Frost bloomed around the nail heads inside the walls. When we sat down to eat, the cabin felt smaller, like it had leaned inward while we weren't looking. That was when the radio changed. It didn't find a station. It didn't clear. It began to hum in a way that didn't match the static. A rise and fall without rhythm. Not words. Not silence either. My father knocked the radio off the counter. It hit the floor and went quiet. He told me to get under the bunk. He didn't explain why. I crawled beneath the heavy frame and pulled the blanket around my shoulders. The wool smelled old and damp. Above me, I could hear my father pacing, each step measured like he was trying not to disturb the floor. Something moved on the roof. Not walking, not pacing. A soft, fast sound, like many small points, brushing across the shingles at once. It traveled from one end of the cabin to the other without stopping. The beams overhead complained under a weight they weren't used to. I held my breath. The sound stayed. A single dark drop landed near the stove. Then another. They spread slowly, catching the firelight without reflecting it. The smell was sharp and old, like metal left too long in the cold. My father raised the rifle, then lowered it again. His hands were shaking. He took a step back. Then the voice came from outside the door. It said my name. Not loud, not whispered. Calm, familiar. The way my mother used to call me inside when dinner was ready. My mother, who was nowhere near those woods. My father shouted at the door. His voice broke halfway through. The sound outside shifted, trying different shapes. A laugh that didn't finish. A sob without breath. Familiar sounds arranged wrong. The ceiling creaked again. The dark spread wider. The cold deepened until my breath showed beneath the bunk. I wanted to move. I wanted to reach for my father. I stayed still, the same way I always did when fear asked for noise. The sound above us gathered in one place. Not rushing. Settling. Snow began to fall inside the cabin, quietly, gently. Night air followed, carrying a smell I didn't know how to name. Something old. Something that had never known warmth. I didn't look up long enough to understand what was there. I only knew my father stopped shouting. The space around him felt hollow, like something had stepped into the room and taken its time. When he turned toward me, his face was calm. Not afraid. Not hurt. Just distant, like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. I bit my tongue and stayed quiet. The storm outside shifted. Wind moved through the trees in long, slow waves. The cabin groaned, then settled again. Snow kept drifting in through the opening above us, soft and steady. I stayed under the bunk, counting my breaths. I don't remember when the night ended. I only remember the silence returning, heavier than before. Even now, years later, I don't go near forests. I avoid radios. Sometimes, late at night, I hear a sound in the hum of the city. That same rise and fall, just beneath everything else. When that happens, I don't look outside. I stayed under the bunk until my legs went numb. The cabin didn't collapse. It didn't fall apart. It just held, like it was deciding whether we were still worth the effort. Snow kept drifting down from above in thin, quiet sheets, melting as soon as it touched the floor. The stove hissed once and went still. I counted my breaths because it was the only thing I knew how to do. My father didn't move. I could see his boots from where I was hiding, pointed toward the center of the room. They were planted the way he stood, when he was listening to something far away, something only he could hear. I waited for him to say my name. He didn't. The silence settled again, heavier than before. I don't know how much time passed, minutes, maybe longer. The cold crept into my fingers, then my wrists. I shifted once, just enough to remind myself I was still there. The sound felt too loud. Nothing answered it. When I finally crawled out, my joints protested like they belonged to someone else. The room looked the same, almost. The snow on the floor had stopped falling, leaving thin white shapes that didn't quite match the opening above. The dark stains near the stove had soaked into the wood, dull and quiet now, like they'd always been there. My father stood exactly where he had been. I said his name once, softly, the way you speak when you don't want to interrupt. He didn't turn. I said it again, louder this time. My voice sounded strange in the small space, like it didn't know where to land. When he finally looked at me, his eyes focused a second too late. He smiled. It wasn't the smile he used when he wanted me to relax. It was the one he wore when he was being polite with strangers. Careful. Empty. His mouth moved like he was about to speak, then stopped. He swallowed once, and his gaze drifted past me toward the door. "We should go," he said. His voice sounded fine. Normal. But it came a beat too late, like it had been practiced. I nodded because nodding was easier than asking questions. That was another habit I never shook. We moved slowly, stepping around the snow, around the stains, around the places where the floor felt softer than it should have. The door opened without a sound. Outside, the storm had eased, not ended, just stepped back. Snow hung in the air, drifting sideways between the trees. The woods stood still, their branches bowed under the weight, patient and close. I pulled my jacket tighter. The cold felt sharper out there, like it knew my skin. My father stepped onto the porch and stopped. He didn't look back at the cabin. He didn't check the roof. He just stood there, breathing evenly, his shoulders rising and falling in a slow rhythm that didn't match the rest of him. I waited for him to say something else. He didn't. The woods made a sound then. Not movement, not wind. Something lower, a soft, uneven hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once, slipping between the trees, settling into the snow. My father tilted his head slightly, the way you do when you're trying to place a song. I felt it in my chest more than my ears. He took one step off the porch. I grabbed his sleeve without thinking. The fabric was cold, stiffer than it should have been. He looked down at my hand, then at my face. For a moment, something flickered there. Recognition, maybe, or just reflection. "Stay here," he said. The words didn't sound like a choice. He stepped forward again, gently pulling free. His boots sank into the snow without leaving clear prints. That's when I noticed it. The way the ground didn't quite respond to his weight. The way the snow smoothed itself behind him. I called out to him. My voice cracked on the second syllable. He didn't turn. The hum deepened. The trees leaned inward, not moving, just closer than they had been a moment before. My breath came out in short, white bursts. I wanted to run after him. I wanted to hide. I stayed where I was. That's when the wind came back. It rushed through the clearing in a single sharp wave, snapping branches, throwing snow into the air, so thick I couldn't see past the porch. The sound swallowed everything. When it passed, the woods were empty. My father was gone. I stood there longer than I should have, waiting for him to reappear between the trees, to call my name, to tell me he was just ahead. The hum faded. The silence returned. The cabin creaked behind me. I went back inside because there was nowhere else to go. I don't remember packing. I only remember holding my gloves and realizing I was wearing only one of them. I don't remember deciding to leave. I just remember the door closing behind me and the snow taking the shape of my footsteps for a few seconds before erasing them. The road was there when I reached it. Narrow, buried, barely recognizable, but solid enough to follow. I walked until my legs burned, and my thoughts stopped trying to catch up. The man who found me said I was lucky. He said storms like that don't let people go. He wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and talked the whole way down the mountain, filling the space with noise. It might keep something else from settling in. I nodded when he spoke. I answered when he asked my name. I didn't mention the hum. They asked questions later. About my father. About the cabin. About the storm. I told them what fit into their shapes. I learned quickly which parts of the truth slid right off them. They never found him. The cabin, they said, was damaged but standing. The roof partially collapsed. The inside disturbed. No signs of struggle. No tracks leading away. They said the woods can be misleading after heavy snow. I moved away as soon as I could. Cities helped. Noise helped. Walls stacked close together. I learned to sleep with something playing quietly in the background. Music, a fan, anything with a steady rhythm. Silence makes it easier to hear things you aren't supposed to. Sometimes, late at night, when everything lines up just wrong, I hear it again. That rise and fall beneath the hum of electricity. Not loud, not urgent, patient. When that happens, I don't move. I've learned that stillness can be a language too. Story number 7. I didn't plan to be awake that late. It was the rain that kept me from sleeping, tapping the metal fire escape outside my apartment in uneven little bursts. The sound slid in and out of my thoughts, never settling into a pattern, and sleep started to feel like something I had misplaced earlier in the evening. By the time the clock on my laptop crept past 1, I stopped pretending I was resting and sat up, letting the quiet glow of the screen warm the room just enough to feel less empty. I was a junior reporter then, not the kind with a desk at the office or a name people recognized. I picked up overflow work, the tasks no one else wanted because they were slow and dull and didn't lead to headlines. It paid just enough to keep me afloat. That night, I told myself I would only check one thing and then shut everything down. The city had started putting old records online. Police logs, scanned forms, audio attachments from decades ago. My assignment was simple. Open each file, make sure the dates lined up, flag anything missing or out of place. I liked the order of it. There was comfort in knowing what came next, line after line, box after box. Rain pressed harder against the windows as I opened the next folder. Most of the entries blended together. Times, addresses, short notes typed by tired hands. Noise complaint. Suspicious sound, unfounded. Welfare check, no answer. I read them without really reading, my eyes gliding over words my mind had already learned to expect. It was easy to forget there had ever been people behind the lines. Then I reached a page that felt thinner. Nothing was obviously wrong. The font matched the others. The margins were clean. But the description field was empty, and the call duration stood out, nearly 20 minutes. No follow-up, no closing note. Just a blank space where an explanation should have been. I leaned back and rubbed my eyes. It was late. At the time, it felt normal to blame the unease on being tired. I clicked the attached audio file out of habit, already half expecting a broken link or a hiss of static. The recording began without warning. No greeting, no dispatcher introduction. Just breathing, not rushed, not panicked. Slow and uneven, like someone trying very hard not to be heard. I adjusted the volume, expecting background noise to fill in. It didn't. The sound sat there close and dry, like it was meant for one person only. Then a man spoke, so softly it almost slipped past me. I think it's still here. He didn't explain what he meant. He didn't have to. There was a pause, and then another voice answered, calm and steady, asking him to confirm his location. He started to, then stopped. That's where it was, he said. It moved. My shoulders tightened before I realized it. I glanced at the rain outside, watching the drops run down the glass in narrow lines. The dispatcher didn't interrupt him. She didn't sound surprised. She asked him to stay on the line and keep his voice low. There was a stretch of silence where neither of them spoke. In that space, I heard something else. Not words. Not movement, just a low sound, steady and close, like air being drawn through something narrow. The man whispered again, faster now. He said his family was there. He said they were staying still. He said he thought that was what it wanted. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I had stopped typing without noticing. I waited for the dispatcher to ask what felt like the obvious question. What is it? Where is it now? Is anyone hurt? She didn't ask. She told him not to look down the hallway. The man made a sound that wasn't quite a sob. He said he already had. He said it seemed embarrassed, like it hadn't meant to be seen yet. The audio wavered, then steadied. There was a heavy noise in the background, dull and close to the microphone, followed by a long scrape that made my jaw tighten. After that, the line went quiet again. I sat there, listening, waiting for shouting or instructions or the sound of help arriving. None of it came. A smaller voice spoke. A child asked if it was over. The dispatcher answered without changing her tone. She said no. She said it was learning. Then the recording ended. The file closed on its own, leaving my screen filled with the neat rows of the archive page. I stared at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. I told myself it had to be staged, a test recording, a training call that never got labeled correctly. That explanation felt thin, but it was easier than the others. I searched the address. Nothing came up, no reports, no articles. It was like the place had never existed in a way that mattered. The rain softened as the night wore on. I shut my laptop and lay down, telling myself I would forget the whole thing by morning. Sleep came in pieces. I dreamed of long hallways and doors that didn't open the way I expected. When I woke, the room felt too still. I lay there listening to my own breathing until it settled into something familiar. Over the next few days, I focused on other work. I avoided that folder, telling myself someone else would flag it eventually. Still, I found my attention drifting when rooms went quiet. I caught myself holding my breath in elevators, on stair landings, in the narrow hall outside my apartment. I've always had a habit of avoiding phone calls. Even before that week, I would let numbers ring out and tell myself I'd call back later. It felt easier to deal with words when they were written down, contained. That habit deepened. I let messages pile up unread. Rain returned on Thursday night, heavier than before. I was on the couch pretending to read when I heard a sound from the hallway outside my door. Not footsteps, just a shift, like someone adjusting their weight. I muted the television and listened. The building made its usual noises, pipes settling, air moving where it always did. My phone buzzed on the table. The number wasn't saved. The message was short. Keep your voice down. I stared at the screen, waiting for another message that would explain it away. None came. I told myself it was a wrong number. Coincidences feel louder when you're already listening for them. Another sound came from the hallway. Not closer, just clearer. I stayed where I was. At the time, it felt normal not to move. I watched the shadow under the door, noticing how it shifted when the hallway light flickered. The rain outside slowed, each drop spaced further apart. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. Eventually the sound faded, leaving only the low hum of the city and my heartbeat. I locked the door again, even though I was sure it already was. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I emailed my editor and said I needed time off. He didn't ask why. Freelance work rarely comes with questions. I spent the day in crowded places, letting noise press in from all sides. When I returned home that evening, the hallway light outside my apartment was on, steady and bright. Everything looked normal. Inside, my laptop sat open on the desk. I was sure I had shut it down. The archive page was still there, the same entry pulled up. The audio file untouched, as if it had never been closed. I didn't press play. I just stood there, listening to the quiet fill the room. The rain started again, soft and patient against the windows. I found myself lowering my breathing to match it, careful not to make unnecessary sound. I left the lights on that night. The rain didn't stop overnight. It thinned out, then came back in soft waves, like it couldn't decide where to settle. I noticed it first thing in the morning, the way it smeared the streetlight glow, even after the sky had started to pale. I stayed in bed longer than usual, listening, letting the sound smooth my thoughts into something flat and manageable. I told myself the night before had been a mix of tired nerves and bad timing. Daylight makes that story easier to believe. I made coffee and stood by the window, watching people move with purpose below. No one paused. No one looked careful. The world kept its pace. I didn't open my laptop right away. That felt important, even if I couldn't explain it. I moved through the apartment slowly, noticing things I usually stepped past. A nick in the doorframe, the soft tick from the heater, the way the floorboard by the couch side if I crossed it too fast. I've always had trouble with tight spaces, elevators, crowded buses, storage rooms with no windows. I never talk about it because it sounds small when said out loud. That morning, the apartment felt narrower than usual, like the walls had leaned in while I slept. I opened a window just to feel the air move. By noon, my phone showed missed calls from work. I let them sit. Avoiding calls is a habit I've never broken. Words feel safer when they stay on a page. Silence gives you time to choose what comes next. The rain picked up again in the afternoon. I sat at the desk and finally opened the laptop, telling myself I would just close the archive page and move on. The screen lit up softly. Everything looked the same. No new times, no alerts. My cursor hovered over the audio file. At the time, it felt normal to hesitate. I closed the browser instead. The relief surprised me. It was small but real, like setting down a bag you didn't realize was heavy. I spent the rest of the afternoon doing nothing useful. Folding clothes, wiping counters that were already clean, waiting for the light outside to change. As evening came on, the city grew louder. Traffic layered over voices and music from somewhere I couldn't place. I welcomed it. Noise makes it harder for your mind to wander. When night settled in, I left the lights on and sat with my jacket still on, as if I might need to leave quickly. I didn't hear anything in the hallway at first. It was close to midnight when the building went quiet again. That special quiet that only shows up when everyone else is asleep or pretending to be. I noticed my breathing before I noticed the sound. Careful, shallow, like I was waiting for a reason not to relax. There was a shift outside my door. Not a step, not a knock, just the sense that something had changed places. I stayed still. I watched the thin line of light under the door. It didn't move. My phone buzzed once on the table. I didn't pick it up. I didn't want the screen to glow. I didn't want words to make it solid. The sound came again, faint and close, like fabric brushing a wall. I focused on the rain, counted the seconds between heavier drops, thought about the archive room at work. How quiet it was, how safe it felt among old things that were done with the world. I wondered if the man on the recording had tried the same thing, if he had listened for anything else to hold on to. After a while, the hallway went still. Sleep came late and thin. I drifted in and out, pulled back by small noises that didn't mean anything on their own. Each time I woke, I checked the door without sitting up, just tracing its shape in the dark. Morning felt earned. The rain finally stopped, leaving the city washed and pale. I packed a bag without really planning to. A few clothes, my notebook, the charger I always forget. I told myself I would stay somewhere else for a few days, somewhere louder, somewhere busy. Before I left, I looked at the wall above the desk. There was nothing there. No tape, no writing, just clean paint and the faint shadow where a frame used to hang. I stood there longer than needed, trying to decide if that made me feel better or worse. The hotel was busy in a way that felt on purpose. Voices in the lobby, wheels rolling over tile, a television playing the news too loud. I checked in and took the stairs instead of the elevator, my chest tight the whole way up. The room was small but bright. I left the curtains open and the lights on. I ordered food I didn't really want and ate it sitting on the edge of the bed, shoes still on. For the first time in days, my phone felt like just a phone. That night, I slept deeper than I expected. The dreams were strange but calm. Long corridors that didn't lead anywhere. Rooms filled with static instead of furniture. When I woke, I felt heavier but steadier, like something had settled instead of followed me. Checked out after 2 nights. Going back to the apartment felt like a test I hadn't prepared for. I unlocked the door slowly, listening for changes. Everything was where I left it. The air smelled stale, familiar. I set my bag down and stood in the living room, waiting for a feeling that didn't come. I didn't open the laptop. Days passed. Messages went unanswered. I told myself I was choosing rest, choosing distance. It was easier not to think about what might happen if I pressed play again. On the 5th night, the rain returned. I was at the desk, writing nothing, when my phone buzzed. A single message. No number attached. Still quiet. I didn't reply. I didn't delete it either. I listened to the rain until it slowed, then thinned into something uneven. I stayed where I was, breathing softly, aware of the space around me. The walls. The door. The hallway beyond it. Nothing else happened. That might have been the hardest part, because now I noticed quiet everywhere, in gaps between voices, in rooms that empty too fast. I catch myself lowering my voice, even when I'm alone. I listen before I open doors, before I turn corners, before I answer questions that don't feel important. Sometimes, when I pass the laptop, I think I hear something faint from the speakers. Not sound exactly. More like the memory of sound waiting to be placed. I haven't gone back to the archives. I don't know if that means I'm safe, or if it means I'm delaying something I already started. Silence doesn't feel neutral anymore. It feels like a space that remembers being filled. Tonight, the rain has stopped again. The building is quiet. My phone is face down on the desk, and the laptop is closed, but my hand keeps drifting toward it. I'm not sure if I'm planning to open it, or just checking that it's still there. I sit there for a long time, listening to my own breathing, deciding whether to leave the room as it is or reach out and lift the lid, just enough to see what waits on the screen. Story number 8. I took the job because it kept me outside and mostly alone. I was the night recorder for the Valley Council, which meant I wrote down weather notes, counted livestock lights, and logged anything unusual that happened after dark. It was late autumn, the kind where the days look calm but the cold creeps in early. I liked the routine. The quiet helped me forget the mistake I made years ago, the one that pushed me away from my family and into work that didn't ask questions. The valley always felt older at night. The hills held the cold like a secret, and the air smelled of dry grass and wood smoke. I would sit in the small watch hut with a lantern and my notebook, listening to the wind slide through the fields. Most nights, nothing happened. I wrote the same lines again and again, just the time and the weather, until my handwriting blurred. I had one bad habit I never broke. When the night got too still, I counted things. Stars. My own breaths. I started doing it after I froze during a flood years back, when I should have acted faster. Counting made me feel like time was under control again. People in the valley didn't talk much about the old stories anymore. They were passed down in half sentences, usually when someone thought a child was asleep. I heard them growing up, about a light that once came too close, about warmth that wasn't meant for skin. I never believed them. Stories felt safer than real regrets. That autumn, the nights grew sharper. Frost showed up on the ground before sunset, and the animals started acting restless. Chickens refused to settle. Dogs stared at the hills longer than they should. I wrote it all down, even though it made my hand ache. One evening, I noticed something small that didn't fit. The shadows were wrong. They stretched too far, thin and slow, like they were learning the shape of the land. I told myself it was just the angle of the moon. At the time, it felt normal to explain it away. The next night, the warmth came. Not heat, just a gentle rise in temperature that didn't belong to the season. I stood outside the hut and held my hands out, expecting the wind. Instead, the air pressed back heavy and quiet. The stars looked dull, like they were being watched. I remembered my regret then. The night I left my younger brother alone near the river because I didn't want to argue with our father. He slipped, and though he lived, he never trusted me the same way again. That memory always surfaced when I felt watched. The valley stayed quiet, but it wasn't empty anymore. My lantern flickered, not from wind, but like something had passed between it and the dark. I didn't look up right away. I counted to 10 instead, slow and careful. When I did look, I saw a light resting above the hills. Not bright, not burning, just there. It felt wrong to stare at it, like standing too close to someone else's thoughts. I wrote a line in my notebook and crossed it out. Then I closed the book. I should have gone home. That was my past mistake repeating itself. I stayed instead, telling myself it was my job to watch. The ground under my boots felt warm, even through the leather. Late autumn had never felt like this. The light didn't move closer. It just stayed, patient. The animals went silent one by one. Even the wind pulled back. I felt smaller than I had in years, like I was a child again pretending to sleep while adults talked in low voices nearby. Memories came in pieces. My mother brushing dirt from my knees. My brother refusing to look at me. The sound of the river at night. I realized then that fear wasn't what kept me still. It was the hope that if I stayed quiet, nothing would change. The light dimmed slightly, as if listening. I thought of the old stories again, about warmth that taught and then left, about distance being a kind of safety. My chest tightened, not with panic, but with something closer to grief. I noticed footprints in the frost near the far fence, not deep, not clear, just impressions where the cold hadn't settled. They led toward the hills and stopped. I didn't follow them. That choice felt important, though I didn't know why. Back in the hut, I wrote more than usual. I wrote about the warmth, the silence, the way the light felt like a question no one should answer yet. My hand shook, and I hated that it did. Near dawn, the temperature dropped again. Frost returned like nothing had happened. The light faded without moving, like a thought you lose when you wake up. Birds slowly returned, unsure at first. When the sun rose, it felt weaker than it should have. I packed up my things and walked home through stiff grass. The valley looked the same, but I didn't. I knew that. At home, I avoided mirrors. I made coffee and let it cool without drinking it. My feet were cold, even inside, and I realized I was counting again, breaths, seconds, regrets. Later that day, people started asking questions about restless animals, about warm ground. I said very little. Being a witness felt heavier than being afraid. That night, as autumn deepened and the cold came back strong, I lay in bed listening to the quiet. I thought about distance and why some things stay far away for a reason. I kept my eyes closed, even when the room felt warmer than it should have. I don't know if the valley learned something that night, or if it remembered something old. I only know that I did, and that staying grounded sometimes means not looking up, even when you feel the light waiting. The second night felt longer, even though the clock said otherwise. I went back to the watch hut because routine felt safer than questions. Staying home would have meant thinking, and I was already doing too much of that. The valley looked the same at first glance, but small things were off. The frost came unevenly, settling in patches, like it had missed spots on purpose. I lit the lantern and sat down with my notebook, though my hand hesitated before writing the date. I didn't like the idea of marking time anymore. Time felt thin now, like it could tear if I pressed too hard. Outside, the hills rested under the dark, quiet and patient. I told myself that nothing had really happened the night before. No sound, no movement, just warmth and imagination. At the time, it felt normal to doubt myself. I'd done it my whole life. Doubt had always been easier than acting. Still, I counted. Fence posts first, then breaths. I reached 30 before I lost track. That had never happened before. My bad habit used to calm me. Now, it It slipped away the moment I needed it. A faint glow returned near the hills, weaker than before. It didn't light the ground. It didn't cast shadows. It just softened the dark, like someone lowering their voice in a quiet room. I stayed seated. Standing felt like a choice I wasn't ready to make. The air warmed again, slow and gentle. Not comforting, just present. My boots rested on ground that should have been cold, and that thought kept circling back. I pressed my heel down harder, as if the earth might react. It didn't. I thought about my brother again, the way he stopped trusting silence after the flood, how he needed noise to feel safe. Radios, open windows, anything but quiet. I understood him better now. Something shifted near the far fence. Not movement exactly, more like the idea of movement. The frost thinned there, pulled back in a narrow line. I watched without leaning forward. Looking too closely felt rude, like staring at someone who hadn't invited me. I wrote a few lines in the notebook, then crossed them out. The page looked tired. I closed the book and rested my hands on it instead. My palms felt warm. That bothered me more than it should have. A memory surfaced that wasn't mine alone. Sitting at the dinner table as a child, being told not to ask certain questions. Not because the answers were dangerous, but because asking changed things. I had never understood that until now. The glow didn't come closer. It didn't need to. The valley felt smaller, like it had folded in on itself. Sounds vanished one by one. No insects, no distant animals. Even my own breathing sounded out of place. I realized then that I wasn't being watched the way a hunter watches prey. It felt more like being noticed, like when someone realizes you've been standing in the room the whole time. There was no urgency in it, no rush. I stood slowly, careful not to scrape the chair. My legs felt heavy but steady. Outside the hut, the warmth grew stronger, brushing against my face like a hand passing near but not touching. I kept my eyes level, focused on the grass a few feet ahead. The ground held faint impressions again, similar to the night before. Not footprints, just places where cold refused to settle. They curved gently, following the shape of the hills, as if the valley itself had learned where to give way. I thought about looking up. The urge came quietly, almost polite. Just curiosity, nothing more. That made it harder to resist. Fear would have been easier. I remembered my mother's voice telling me not to stare at the sun when I was young. Not because it was evil, just because some things hurt even when they mean no harm. That thought kept my chin down. The warmth lingered, then eased back. The glow dimmed further, thinning into the dark until it was hard to tell if it had ever been there at all. Sound returned slowly, like the valley stretching after holding still too long. By dawn, the frost lay flat and even again. Everything looked ordinary, that was the worst part. Ordinary meant no proof, no reason, no explanation. Just memory. I went home and slept through the morning. When I woke, my feet were still cold, even under blankets. I lay there listening to the house settle, counting breaths again. This time I made it to 40. Over the next few days, people talked more. Quiet conversations at the edge of fields, questions without direction. I listened more than I spoke, saying less felt like respect. Animals calmed, frost behaved. The valley pretended nothing had happened. I followed its lead. Routine returned, but thinner than before. At night, I avoided the hills. I kept my work close to the hut, my eyes on the ground. Sometimes warmth brushed past anyway, brief and familiar. I didn't react. Acknowledging it felt like enough. One evening, I found my notebook open where I didn't remember leaving it. A single line sat on the page in my handwriting, though I couldn't recall writing it. It wasn't a warning or a message, just a note about the temperature being higher than expected. I didn't tear the page out. I closed the book and put it away. Some records don't need follow-up. I still count when the night grows too quiet. It doesn't calm me like it used to, but it reminds me where I am. Grounded, looking down, waiting without waiting. The valley remains. So does the distance. I think that's the point. Not everything needs to come closer. Some things stay far so the rest of us can stay whole. Story number 9. I didn't come to the lake because I missed camping. I came because the doctor told me to avoid crowds and loud places for a while, and the off-season campground by the reservoir was empty enough to feel manageable. Late summer had a way of thinning people out. Schools were starting soon. Heat made everyone impatient. Silence, on the other hand, was still available. The water sat low in the basin, darker than I remembered. The sign at the entrance said swimming was allowed again, though the paint looked newer than the post holding it up. I parked near the tree line and took my time unloading, listening to the cicadas slow their rhythm as the afternoon leaned toward evening. I've always had trouble with stillness. When nothing moves, my mind fills the space too quickly. To keep that from happening, I focus on small tasks: tent poles, stakes, counting steps from the car to the shoreline. It's a habit I picked up after a bad year, one where reacting too slowly cost me someone I cared about. Since then, staying busy has felt like responsibility. The lake smelled clean, but not fresh. More like something sealed too long. I told myself that was normal. Water held heat differently. Algae bloomed quietly. Nature didn't owe anyone comfort. I didn't plan to swim. I never do in places where the bottom drops too suddenly. Still, I walked out onto the old wooden platform near the shore. It creaked under my weight, familiar and tired. The boards were sun-bleached, worn smooth by years of feet and careless jumps. The surface of the water barely moved. No ripples, no insects breaking through. I watched my reflection wobble, then settle. For a moment, it felt like the lake was watching back, not in a threatening way, just aware. At the time, it felt normal to stay there longer than I meant to. By the time I went back to camp, the light had softened. Shadows stretched across the dirt paths, thin and slow. I cooked a simple meal and ate it standing up, watching the tree line. Somewhere deeper in the woods, something shifted, then went still again. Probably a deer. Probably. That night, sleep came unevenly. Heat pressed against the tent walls, and the air felt thicker than it should have. I lay on my back, listening to my own breathing, counting again without meaning to. When I reached 20, I started over. Sometime after midnight, I noticed the sound. Not a noise, exactly. More like a pressure. A steady presence that made it harder to ignore my heartbeat. It felt louder than usual, heavy in my ears. I sat up slowly, unzipping the tent just enough to let cooler air in. The campground was quiet. No lights, no voices. The lake lay flat and dark beyond the trees, reflecting nothing. The pressure eased once I focused on it, which made me uneasy. Relief shouldn't come that easily. Morning arrived pale and hazy. I felt tired but alert, like I'd slept with one eye open. My appetite was stronger than usual. I ate more than I packed for, telling myself I'd resupply in town later. As the sun climbed, the lake changed color. Blue crept back into it, bright and inviting. A couple arrived near midday, setting up closer to the water. They laughed easily, watched each other skip stones, normal sounds. I thought about leaving then. Instead, I stayed. The heat pushed down hard in the afternoon. The couple went swimming. I watched from the shade, noticing how long they stayed under, how still the surface became after each dive. When they finally came back up, they looked flushed and energized, almost restless. One of them waved at me. I waved back, feeling oddly tired. Later, when they left for town, the quiet returned too quickly. I walked to the edge of the lake and crouched, letting my fingers brush the water. It was warmer than before. Not unpleasant, just wrong for the time of day. I rinsed my hands and wiped them on my shorts. My pulse felt steady. I checked anyway. That evening, the pressure came back stronger. Not painful, just present. Like standing too close to a generator. The cicadas stopped early. Even the wind pulled away, leaving the trees stiff and silent. I sat by the lake longer than I should have, watching the sky darken. The water held the last light stubbornly, refusing to give it back. My chest felt tight, not with fear, but with something closer to anticipation that scared me more. I stood up and nearly lost my balance. Not dizzy, just off center. I waited for the feeling to pass. When I returned to the tent, my heart sounded louder in my ears. I lay down and pressed my palm to my chest, counting again. The rhythm didn't change. Still, I kept my hand there longer than necessary. Sometime before dawn, I woke with my jaw clenched and my skin damp with sweat. The pressure was gone, replaced by a hollow quiet that felt unfinished, like something had paused mid-thought. I packed slower than planned, folded things twice, checked the shoreline once more before leaving. The lake looked calm, ordinary. As I drove away, I noticed my hands shaking slightly on the wheel. I told myself it was dehydration. Heat. Nothing more. But even miles later, with the trees thinning and the road warming under the tires, I could still feel the rhythm. Not my heartbeat, just close enough to it that I didn't want to listen too hard. The second night pulled me back before I had time to decide. I told myself I was only staying one more evening to let the heat break and to make sure what I felt wasn't just nerves. Leaving too fast would have meant admitting something I didn't yet have words for. So I stayed, doing small things slowly, stretching time the way people do when they're not ready to move on. The campground felt quieter than it should have. Not empty, just muted. Even my footsteps sounded softer, like the ground was absorbing them. I packed my food away early and sat on the cooler, watching the sky fade from pale blue to a thin, tired gray. I noticed I was breathing in time with something else. Not perfectly, just close enough to notice when it drifted. That unsettled me more than if it had matched exactly. I stood up and walked a short loop around my site, counting steps again. The habit came back easily, like it had been waiting. When I reached the lake, the smell had changed. Less clean, more metallic. I didn't kneel this time. I stayed back, hands in my pockets, staring at the surface. It was darker than it should have been for that hour, holding on to shadow even as the sky still had light to give. I remembered something from childhood then, a doctor pressing a stethoscope to my chest and telling me to breathe normally. I had tried too hard, pulling air in fast, until he told me to stop helping. Some things work better when you let them happen. The thought stayed with me as the light finally slipped away. I walked back to the tent and zipped it closed, leaving a small gap at the top. The air inside felt heavy again, warm in a way that didn't fade when the sun did. That night, sleep came in pieces, short stretches followed by long moments of listening. Every time I woke, the pressure was there. Not stronger, just closer, like it had learned where I was. At some point, I became aware of the sound. Not a thump, not exactly. More like a fullness in my ears, as if the quiet itself had weight. I pressed my palm to my chest again, feeling the familiar rhythm. It steadied me, even as something nearby seemed to adjust to it. I didn't open my eyes right away. Lying still felt important. When I finally did, the tent looked the same. Shadows where they should be. No movement. The pressure eased slightly, like something had lost interest. Morning came slow and dull. The sky stayed overcast, trapping the heat close to the ground. I felt tired in a way that sleep hadn't touched. Still, my appetite was sharp. I ate everything I had left without really tasting it. As I packed, I found damp footprints near the edge of the water. Not clear enough to follow. Just impressions where the dirt stayed dark, longer than it should have. They didn't lead anywhere obvious. They just existed. I should have left then. Instead, I walked the trail that looped around the lake. It was short and familiar, meant for families and easy afternoons. Halfway through, the forest thinned, opening onto a stretch of rock that looked out over the water. Standing there, I felt it again, that sense of being noticed. Not watched, not followed, just included. My chest tightened, not with pain, but with awareness. My pulse felt stronger, fuller. I counted it without touching my wrist. I didn't need to. It was loud enough on its own. A strange thought crossed my mind then, simple and uninvited. That whatever was here didn't feel finished. Not with the lake.
Not with me.
The idea scared me. But it also explained the anticipation I'd been feeling, like waiting for a question you already know the answer to. I left the trail and went back to camp, moving faster now. My hands shook as I folded the tent, and I had to redo one corner twice. The pressure didn't stop me. It followed, patient and steady. Driving away felt harder than it should have. The road shimmered in the heat, bending slightly as it climbed. I checked the mirror more than once, though there was nothing to see behind me but trees and dust. Even miles out, the rhythm stayed with me. Not constant, just present enough that I noticed when it faded and when it returned. Back home, things didn't reset the way I expected. The air inside my apartment felt too still. Water from the tap tasted flat. I lay awake that night, counting breaths again, matching them carefully so they stayed mine. Over the next few days, I felt stronger. Not healthier, just more awake. Sounds carried farther. My own heartbeat felt closer to the surface, like it didn't need as much effort anymore. I avoided mirrors without meaning to. I drank bottled water. I stayed indoors when the evenings grew quiet. Still, sometimes when everything settled just right, I felt the pressure return. Gentle. Familiar. Once, late at night, I caught myself resting my hand over my chest again, listening. For a moment, the rhythm felt shared, not doubled. Just answered. That scared me enough to move my hand away. I don't talk about the lake anymore. When people mention it, I nod and change the subject. Some places don't need stories added to them. They do fine on their own. At night, when the city noise thins and the air grows heavy, I remind myself to stay grounded, to count, to breathe, to keep my eyes open or closed when it feels right. I don't know if what I felt was the beginning of something or the echo of something old. I only know that I listen differently now, and that sometimes, when the room is very quiet, I wait to hear which rhythm settles first.